Hello, I'm Brian with glutenfreehomebrewing.com. Last July we started a series where we were exploring gluten-free malts, and we were going to convert a recipe together from a conventional recipe to gluten-free in time to brew it for this fall, or now last fall. So we're back at it today. We got a little sidetracked. You might have noticed that there's a number of new products that we're offering, a number of new malts we're offering as well, and quite a few things have actually even changed, which actually makes this project a little different, because we can make some recommendations that we couldn't have made had we actually finished the series when we started it. So we're gonna look at the recipe that's on our blog. So if you're following on YouTube, jump over to our website, go to our blog. You'll see 4 previous video blogs. The first one, I believe, had the chart where we kind of mapped out all the different malts, their flavor profile, and some information like PPG and color and things like that. I think the second or third in the series had the recipe that we're actually converting, and in our last episode we actually went over the actual recipe and talked about the conventional malts, reviewed the profile from the producers of those malts, and today we're going to actually decide what malt we're going to start with as far as converting it, adapting it to gluten-free. So if you haven't come up with your own recipe, just review the recipes that we've put on the blog for this series today, for this episode today. What we're not going to get into, before I go there, what we're not going to get into is the use of the pumpkin in this recipe. In hindsight, maybe we should have picked a different recipe. The pumpkin, we couldn't quite figure out the math of the original recipe, so we put it in our calculator and figured out the approximate PPG of pumpkin, which had to really come out to about 20 ppg, which, if you've gone to different forums and what websites and talked about or read about using pumpkin, that seems quite high. There's a big debate about whether or not you use pumpkin in the mash, if you use it in boil, if you use pumpkin at all, or just the spices, or maybe use something else like sweet potatoes or yams or butternut squash. We're not going to get into that today. What we are going to do is just assume that that's a lot of potential gravity from the pumpkin, and we're going to substitute that with biscuit rice malt, which, going back to a previous episode, one of the flavor profiles that we had to come up with was a biscuit-like quality, which works out perfect because we're going to get that from the biscuit rice malt that we're using in our adaptation of this recipe. We have 2 versions. The first version is our conventional, kind of like where we start at adapting recipes, and then we have a second version that's using the new Ondia Pro liquid enzyme complex that you can read about on our blog as well. We're going to use pale millet malt in our first adaptation. We don't have a whole lot of options as far as base malts. We kind of covered those in the past. We talked about the biscuit rice malt. We're going to use that as well. The Munich, when we talked about swapping things out one for one, the Munich is one of those things that we kind of felt like there was enough similarities between the malt profiles, the style of malt, that was a pretty easy exchange. The caramel 60L, I think, was an original ingredient. When we started this series in July, we didn't have an equivalent to that. We do now. We rolled out a series of new malts from Grouse, including the Red Wing Amber and 4 versions of caramel. There's the regular caramel, the 90L, 120L, and 240L. So we're going to be using the 90L, a little bit darker than the 60L, but it's going to have the right flavors coming through that we want for the substitution of the malt. And then we're going to use pale buckwheat malt in place of, I think it's the Victory malt, if I remember correctly. There's a malt that is basically, it's just designed to boost body, head retention, mouthfeel of the beer, and that's pretty much what buckwheat malt does. In small quantities, it's pretty not noticeable in my opinion. In large quantities, it is definitely noticeable. We had a beer using buckwheat, I think about 50% of the grain bill, and it was really a good experience to realize that buckwheat really does contribute to those characteristics in a beer. but probably just don't want to use that high percentage in a grain bill. We find that about 2 pounds in a beer is about where we like it, so that's the substitution we're going to make. In the past, we would use a really, to make up the PPG, we would increase the base malt. And the feedback that we got from that and the experience that we had ourselves from that is that the character malts, the roasted malts, all the other non-base malts weren't as robust and didn't really come through in the beers as much as we liked. So our current methodology is to try to keep the base malts, and it depends on the style of the beer whether or not this strategy will work, but try and keep the base malts about 1-to-1 from the conventional recipe, and increase the grain bill of the character and specialty malts, roasted malts, by about 25-30% for starters, and then kind of tweak the recipe as you brew it once or twice, or as many times as it takes, or never again. That's our current methodology. Going to Ondia Pro, that creates a whole new ball game in some regards. We're switching over to the pale rice malt for the base malt instead of the millet for this proposed recipe. Ondia Pro seems to do an amazing job converting a lot of the potential gravity hasn't been realized in rice malt using other enzymes. We're not going to get into that today. There's an amazing article on our blog that goes into a lot of detail about that. And there's more research going into it as well, so look for information up and coming. Sticking with the biscuit, the Munich, the pale, and the caramel 90, we're keeping the same percentages of the overall grain bill. So we're able to reduce the overall grain bill from 20.75 pounds to, and this is as much of a guess as it is some of our preliminary experience using Ondia Pro, we're gonna say 15.75 pounds for starters. Big disclaimer here. Between myself, between Jason and JP that have been doing a lot of the research on Ondia Pro, we're really in the beginning stages of really being able to make any kind of recommendations for this. So what I'm saying is this is probably a good starting point. You may end up getting a higher beginning gravity. You may get a lower beginning gravity, but I think you might actually err on the side of this grain bill might still even be a little bit too big yet. That's the thing that we're noticing, again, with all the unrealized fermentables in rice malt that doesn't really get extracted or converted from the enzymes we've been using up to this point. Rice malt has a much greater potential than we were realizing up until now. So we're able to get smaller grain bills to more the equivalent size of conventional malts. One thing that caught my eye when I was plugging in the numbers from the original recipe to figure out where these numbers are coming from is their PPG range from 33.52 to 36.23. The smallest or the least amount of potential gravity in the malts was still higher than we really get to enjoy using gluten-free malts. So Ondia Pro might give us more equal playing field in that regard, and allow us to have the more equivalent grain bill sizes, which, thinking forward, when we're adapting recipes in the future, maybe we don't have to bump up the size of our grain bills as much as we have in the past, because as far as potential gravity in the malts, we might be more closely matching what they are in the conventional world. So a lot of really exciting stuff coming in the future here. This brewing gluten-free beers has changed radically in a very short period of time, not just the 9 years that we've been doing it, but just the last 9 months. So we're really excited about the future. We're really excited to hear if anybody brews this particular recipe and gives us feedback, particularly if it's the Ondia Pro recipe, because we'd be interested in that math, those numbers behind it, to see if it's consistent with what we've been seeing. And keep looking for our blogs and newsletters as far as information regarding series like this and other series like we did with the Grainfather, or with what we're going to be doing with the Ondia Pro. So again, I'm Brian with glutenfreehomebrewing.com. Thank you for watching.